Man is animal, and like all other animals, he is governed by patterns, whether they be learned or naturally arising, and rhythms, generally governed by his form, a modus operandi or prime directives, like all other animals, is to reproduce ourselves, to replicate, to spread our seed in the most efficient way possible, with no regard for anything else aside from aiding our fellow man in doing the same. We're not always aiding our fellow man in doing the same if he is a competition, if he is a threat to our offspring. Naturally, resources are scarce and harm is plenty, so we are limited in the way in which we can utilize our seed to produce the true treasures of life, other people, progeny. Thus, I posit that man, by his very nature, retains, not indefinitely, otherwise there would be no species to speak of, and I would not be here to write and tell you this. The worlds around him, with lush greens and browns, reds for blood and white for snow, aqua for the ocean, the world as he perceives it would be quite different, not a single image of sexuality inside his mind would be chaste, and his sexual experiences would be perceived as they are occurring. His sexuality, like his mind, is present. This particular chapter makes me think about the intention behind the assets we use and invest in. At least this is what the author Comfortable Shift is making me think about in my understanding of this. Meaning, it is unintelligent to be dogmatic in our approach to this particular practice. It is, however, intelligent to recognize that this can be used for procreation, the procreation of our offspring, or the regeneration of our very bodies. Some people would even go far as to say that it regenerates or it reinvigorates the spirit, the soul, and is a conduit for our connection with God. Carnality, it says, brings us or attaches us to earth. Chastity, it is said, provides a conduit, opens up channels for us to speak with divine. But let's press on. When partaking in this ritual copulation, the ancients were wise and rightfully defined such an act of conception, knowing its power and the horrors that come from misusing it. A man's testosterone would flare up to 400%. He would not let any beast, any man, or any obstacle come between him and absolute end of the most sublime goal of placing his nectar in her chalice to fill her holy grail, so her cup might runneth over with new life. This makes me think about the natural dilution of our sexual powers, prowess, and fertility in respects to how little men can be self-assured of them procreating, with these fertility levels dropping very precipitously over the last century. In that moment of supreme bliss, he would view the world in adversarial lenses. Others were the potential rivals and threats to his copulation, to his ultimate victory. We can extrapolate this to one viewing the behavior of men as a copulate in the present world, and to look at the aggression and paranoia of those who either masturbate or have sex too frequently, or those who are caught in the act of masturbation and or sex. You have to excuse me, the grammar is a challenge for me here. One may only need to slightly disturb such men to see the pure vitriol filling them, their form in that moment. We know that such behavior was not the norm, since how could men perform such highly cooperative tasks in such an aroused state? The fact that we are taken aback by such behavior also lends credence to the idea that this behavior is an anomaly and not the norm. Men who are retaining effectively and regaining this primeval or primordial form are more congenial, dangerous, yet calm and cooperative. The PMO neurosis feeding more neurosis, men. It perverts the natural way we perceive things, look at things, act, articulate ourselves through the world, and behave in a manner that is congruent with just calm, just patience, with no neurosis, no depression, no anxiety, with self-preservation, respect, and generativity in the pursuit of our goals. Now, when we in present age attempt to retain our seeds in hope of regaining this primordial form and the natural benefits that have come to be associated with it, we face quite the impasse. We, unlike these ancient people, suffer under the Cartesian delusion. I think so, therefore I am, or body-mind duality. Yes, Descartes was infinitely incorrect when he said this. I think, therefore I am. No, you are, therefore you think. You have a mind, therefore you can use it. You are, therefore you have a body, and therefore you can feel it. It is consciousness that precedes intellect. It is consciousness that precedes cognition. To think conversely is mind-body duality. It is to be bound by the matrix, to be bound by the Maya, to think that yourself not so significant, to think that your soul is not impermanent, that your soul is not immutable, that your soul is not eternally valid. You do not end at your fingertips. Thus we conceive of ourselves as minds, spirits inside a suite of flesh, and attempt to rationalize our desires and the thoughts that bubble up, urging us to partake in excess. We never once conceiving that these thought patterns are not being generated consciously in a rational fashion, but are bubbling from the soma, from the body that we deem as inert, as being a completely controlled thing. So when we hear about SR, Kareza, Taoism, and the mystery of Kundalini, the chambers of the bridegroom bridal chamber, we think that all we need do is retain our sexual energy, the physical liquid, and that our minds, the thinking portion, may be polluted with images, scenes, and fantasies of the heart's passions. Those things we are willing to suffer for. All the erotic behavior of idealized partners that do not exist, at least not in your unretained state. When you come home to the realization that you are in possession of a mind and body, it makes you understand, or at least gives me more hope and potency to the reality that we have more jurisdiction over them. Do not be identified with the emotions of the body. Do not be identified with the thoughts of the mind, the impressions of some of this material that has poisoned your long-term memory. When you can disidentify from mind and body, it gives you an opportunity to cleanse them, to purify them, to create more space and distance between the impressions that would have you thinking like a beast walking on all fours. These thoughts beget a physiological effect and drift us towards the adversarial mindset where we view the entire world against us. This is why so many new retainers report feeling incredible amounts of negative aggression towards individuals as opposed to feelings of just conquest against circumstance. This is also why when we edge or fantasize to vivid material while retaining, we feel as though the world is truly against us. Why we feel something akin to repulsion from others as opposed to magnetism that naturally comes through proper adherence to the sublime practice. More esoteric ideas ahead, I'm sure you'll be welcoming. Now, from an esoteric perspective, I have observed that the reproductive force is the crudest in terms of the material versus the subtle. There are no moral connotations, forms of creative energy in the universe. A higher form being imagination, at least with respect to being a human, and the highest being deep meditation on the true structures of reality and trying to attune oneself to it through prayer. True prayer, not mere recitation of verses, walking with the creative force of reality. There is a potency that is added to the opening channels of prayer, opening the communications between yourself and your God or divine when your life force energy is intact. When we are attempting to procreate, we are channeling our creative force in the higher mental planes into the physical plane. Thus, we drape ourselves in the ruling form of the physical plane, that being the adversarial dynamic of the dog-eat-dog world. We become aggressive, too much dopamine causing paranoia and psychosis, too much testosterone can cause a murderous rage, complete and utter unhinged delusion. Since ruling form of the physical plane does not value truth, nature will allow her animals to delude themselves if it means they get to perform their unchanging pattern and behavior. I don't necessarily agree with the latter point there, because even nature, even animals have a mating season. There is perfection in God's creation, but unfortunately we have freedom of will, freedom to make poor choices. Having access to those forces that are on high may alter our patterns or adapt to situations in our environment. Those in the Judeo-Christian schools comprehend since Eden is a garden is man-made construct that houses a certain subset of nature in a juxtaposition to an untamed wilderness. And the Bible, the Torah, makes sure to constantly present this in careful delineation. When we partake in things of more consumptive nature and or the misuse of sex, the only creative force that might be consistently misused, since one can imagine horror in the mind, but without the will and physical know-how, one is powerless to convert the horrors of imagination into the real world to affect other people. I made a very curious video a couple of days ago or weeks ago in respects to this notion that the Garden of Eden is an analogy to this heaven state of mind, and the tree of knowledge is as an analogy to our sexual organs, and over gratification is overindulgence of the forbidden fruit, which can throw us out of Eden. When we retain, we gain. We can see the higher forms, the truer aspects of life, and many of you have experienced an increase in luck and new opportunities being presented to you, almost as if the creative force of the universe is rewarding for rejecting the adversarial delusion in the modern world, for breaking through the veil of Maya or matrix that she has placed upon her other creatures, for embracing the creative spark of the divine. In Judaism, one who guards his covenant is granted the ability to see Shekinah, probably mispronounced that, God's divine presence. In Gnosis Christianity, one can enter the bridal chamber. When you make two into one, and when you make the inner as the outer and the upper as the lower, and when you make the male and female into a single one, so that male shall not be male and the female shall not be female, then you will enter the kingdom of God. That's what you call yoga. So an end to duality. You have the yin, you have the yang. The smashing together, the coming together is the end of duality and universal consciousness, or God realization. Many other schools of ancient wisdom teach that our minds are the image of God, and that we can conceive of new universes and realities that are a derivative of this one, and that we focus on in this world will affect this world. When we retain properly, we can think of positive thoughts being aligned with the cooperation and creative force of higher planes, and see those effects around us. When we pollute our minds, however, and fill our thoughts with negativity, with unrestrained sexuality, many who partake in such fantasies rarely, if ever, fantasize about loving a woman, making children and providing for them. They view the women in question as a masturbatory tool, so they may expel and effectively reject the creative force without creating anything in its stead. Think about that. You're not creating anything. You're merely gratifying. Wasting a feeling of fleeting pleasure when the pleasure of retaining it far exceeds that of retaining when viewed over a long period of time. I don't like to call it pleasure. I like to call it joy. You have found joy, more satiating, more permeating, more fulfilling. Pleasure is cheap. We see this adversarial behavior manifested in our lives day to day. Bosses not responding to us favorably, even though our actions, discussions, and recommendations may be quite logical. Women who we superficially treat with favor reject us. I have even had friends who have experienced their technology not working as intended. Some have received job offers and life-changing opportunities whilst retaining purely only for such offers to be taken away. Changed or not manifested as expected when one breaks their way if they expel or they retain impurely. There is an emotional connection to this practice, meaning I believe it is not enough to be continent. I believe it's also important that this continent serves as a bedrock of positive emotions in Dawkinson's scale. D. Hawkinson's. Courage, love, tranquility, emotion, higher vibratory levels. It is not enough to change a behavior, but you have to change the emotion that you're resonating in congruence with that behavior. And I think this would be a good point to end on, because many of you individuals who are so ensconced and attached to the outcomes will invariably fail because you've not done the work. You've not done the emotional work. You're still not meditating. You're still not letting go. You're still not journaling. You're not doing that deep spiritual work. You say you're religious, but I see you practicing no religion. Are you reading your holy book? Are you reading the Quran? Are you reading the Gita? Are you reading the Upanishads? Are you reading the Holy Bible? Are you reading the Torah? Are you praying and opening a dialogue with your God? This is where the work happens. It's vibratory. It is vibratory. These are not theories. These are facts. Speak soon.